Hello everybody and welcome. Welcome to our first Listen, Imagine, Compose teacher CPD session, which we are running this year instead of holding an away day, which we normally do, which involves face-to-face and not socially distancing. So great to see so many people on Zoom. I think this is probably the biggest Zoom meeting I've been involved in so far. I'm called Judith Robinson and I'm Head of Education at Sound and Music, and I work with two colleagues in particular on Listen, Imagine, Compose. It's a partnership project between Birmingham Contemporary Music Group with Nancy, who's here today, and also Martin Faultley, who's a professor at Birmingham City University. We've been working on Listen, Imagine, Compose, I think, for 10 years now. And we've been exploring how composing is taught and learned in secondary schools and with young people of secondary school age. It started out as a series of acting research projects, and we now run CPD and sort of including a master's accredited course at Birmingham City University. So today we thought we'd start off by being topical, and each of our sessions is going to explore how we support young composers. And today we thought that we would start by looking specifically at how to work in this sort of current lockdown, remote online teaching environment. You know, this situation's come upon us so quickly, so suddenly, and we've all had to sort of scramble for new ideas, new resources, new ways of working. So during the session today, we've got 3 teachers joining us who are all secondary music teachers. We've got Sarah, Annie and Nick. They're each going to talk about their experience of what they've done and what they've learnt in this period. And I hope that gives you some ideas and thoughts about how you might develop your own work as well. Martin is going to talk to us about some of the sort of some more philosophical and pedagogical issues that come around working with young people when they're at home and not in the space with you. And then we're going to have some discussion groups, because although we've got 3 teachers here who are all very experienced in their own right, then obviously you all come with experience and knowledge, and it would be great to share that and to have chance to do that. So we're going to put you into randomly generated groups for a discussion, out of which we hope that some top tips and ideas for work, you know, supporting young composers during this lockdown period. We hope that you can kind of group source some of those, and we'll share those back. And then we did actually do a bit of research, a bit of an online questionnaire ahead of setting up these sessions last month. And one of the messages we heard loud and clear from people who replied to that survey was how people were looking for sort of ideas, compositional ideas and projects that they could do with their children and young people that they're teaching. So we're actually going to do some ourselves. And because we're all remote, we're all here on Zoom, we'll be doing a remote task, and we're joined by David Horn, who's a composer. He teaches at the Royal Northern College of Music. Hi David. And he also teaches on the Sound of Music's residential summer school, which is a digital affair this year. And we're joined also by Kyle Horch, who's a sax player. He plays for Birmingham Contemporary Music Group. So we've got a live musician to realise some of our ideas. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask our first guest teacher, who is Sarah Henton, to speak. Before I do that, just a couple of things about session etiquette. As there's so many of us, it would be great to keep yourselves muted whilst other people are making presentations, and that just helps keep the background noise down. I don't know how familiar you are with Zoom, but if you're not, then I recommend you put it into speaker view. There's a little icon in the top right corner. You can toggle between a gallery view, which is everybody equal sized tiles, and or the person who's speaking is big with lots of little pictures of everybody else. So you might want to put people into speaker view, and certainly when people are using PowerPoint and sharing their screens, then that will be helpful because you'll be able to see the screen that they're sharing. If you're having troubles with your bandwidth, then you can switch off your video, and that actually would help your bandwidth and, you know, the quality of what you receive. And there's a chat function, so if you do have comments and queries, or sort of, I do this great thing, or there's a great link here, if you put it into the chat, that will all be saved and downloaded at my end at the end of the session, and I can share that afterwards. And finally, we are recording the session, so we will again make the video of this available on the Listen, Imagine, Compose website. I'll give you details of all where that will be in an email sort of after this session. So now that I've got Sarah on tenterhooks, it really is time to hand over to Sarah. Thank you, Sarah.
Hello everyone. I'm a bit of a Zoom novice, so please bear with me. I'm not going to be sharing any slides, although I will send them to Judith after this, so that if there's any ideas that you want to steal, feel free. I'm Sarah. I've been teaching music now for 12 years. I was on the Midlands pilot project for Listen, Imagine, Compose, so I was one of the very first people to do the project. I work in Walsall Common at Heart of England. I've been there for 7 years, and it's standard secondary school. We take in about 225 per year group. The other part of my role as well is I'm head of year 8 and 9. So it's quite an interesting time at the moment, doing a head of music job alongside a head of year job, and looking at how children are managing this transition to distance learning. But I'm here to talk to you as a head of music today, and I'm going to focus on what we've been doing with year 7 and 8, because I've got to hold my hands up. I haven't yet really attempted it with year 10s. I'm still in the toying with what's the best way to go, what are we going to have to do. So I have left Key Stage 4 alone a little bit with composition at the moment. So I want to share with you 2 tasks that I've done with year 7 and a task I've done with year 8 to varying degrees of success. I was going to start a timer because I've been told I've got 10 minutes, so someone please give me the cue if I'm going over. One of the units we'd just done before lockdown came in was Samba with year 7, so we've been looking at polyrhythms and done a lot of performance. And we've made the decision with year 7 to recover and consolidate skills in lockdown, rather than try and continue with a curriculum that's very much designed to take place in the classroom. So we had done a few lessons around listening to Samba and performing Samba rhythms. And I was really keen for them to have a go at some kind of composition, some rhythmic composition. Obviously, limited instruments for them at home, so we went down the route of a stomp idea, and we were absolutely blown away by the compositions we got back. First of all, it was really interesting to see some of those students who, in a class situation when they're doing group composition, might be a character that would kind of usually just be in the shadows or follow other people's ideas. And actually, for distance learning, some of the composition tasks have really allowed different students to flourish. We had one particular child that had organised her whole family, including 6 siblings, parents, into their own stomp band, and they'd put it all together. So that was obviously an afternoon of entertainment for them all, but also it was great to see a child who wouldn't usually take a conductor or lead composing role to feel confident in that setting and compose in a completely different way to how they would in the classroom. And it's something I wouldn't usually be privileged enough to see. I mean, in theory, we're not allowed to receive videos from students in our school, safeguarding, but that particular child was so proud their parents did send me the video. The other thing which was really interesting to see is how well they did without me there to facilitate the learning. And reflecting on that, I don't know if it was a case of actually maybe we'd just taught Samba really well beforehand, or perhaps, and I know I've visited this in other talks that I've done for Listen, Imagine, Compose, are my expectations too low? And I think lots of music teachers sometimes, especially with year 7, when we almost start again with them, some students have come out with rhythms that I perhaps wouldn't have heard had I been facilitating it, because they follow my instructions to the letter because they want to please, whereas actually having a little bit more freedom and me not being there to guide them, they've had to discover this themselves. The other project we've just done this week, so the stomp and the rhythmic composition was right at the beginning of lockdown, so what are we, 8-9 weeks later. This week we've moved on to the seasons, and one of the things we've been really keen to try and keep is the idea of listening, performing and composing. Now obviously in lockdown it's very easy. I know a lot of children are getting overloads with worksheets and PowerPoints and things like that. So we've been really vigilant to try and keep that balance. And actually composition has been the highest return rate, which really surprised me. I will hold my hands up to that. The weeks that we've set composition, we've had more returns from students than the other weeks. So yeah, I digress. So we're on to the seasons. They've done a week where we've consolidated musical elements. Year 7 for us is all about those foundations, and we use the fantastic resources on musical context with the musical elements song. They've then had a week where they were able to perform either on like a little keyboard app or something on their phone, some of the themes. And this week they were asked to choose a season. And on the PowerPoint that I will send out, and I might be able to play it to you now, this is where we see we've had some amazing pieces of work back. Now they are year 7s and they haven't had a music lesson for 10 weeks, but I've discovered we haven't taught them harmony yet, and it's been really interesting. This is one student who's never composed independently in lessons, who composed a piece on summer using, his focus was pitch and duration. You might be able to hear this. Let's see. No, it's going to be too quiet, I think. I will. Oh, can you hear it? Okay, here we go. Now, what I thought was really interesting about that piece is straight away he's quite naturally fallen into using little sequences, and they have done keyboard work, and you can very much hear that 5-finger work on the keyboard, and maybe exploring a few notes that wouldn't naturally fall under those 5 fingers. This is another example of a child was on as I learnt violin in year 3, haven't picked it up since. Well, lockdown has persuaded him to pick up his brother's violin, and this piece he wrote was about, he was focusing on the bees buzzing, and that's the low pitches, and he wanted the birds singing, which were the higher pitches. So again, I'm not sure how well you'll hear this, but I will send it through on the PowerPoint so you can hear it if not. Now again, it's very simplistic in what it does, but in a classroom he never would have chosen to pick up a violin. And even rhythmically, in terms of, obviously as a boy, and this particular student is very much, I'm rushing to get it done, but to produce something, and actually one of the big things to want to send it to your teacher, I was quite pleased with that one. And one of the other things that we've had is actually I'm going to leave that one because I'm aware that I've been talking already, so you can come back to that one on there. The thing that didn't work well was using learning music and the Ableton website. Now, I did this at the beginning of lockdown and I was really excited. It was my first project for year 8 and I thought, this is going to be great. They're going to absolutely love it. It was a complete flop. They really did not like it at all. We focused on rhythm one week, where they can use the boxes, and we use GarageBand at school. So the website's great. It's really easy to navigate. It's broken down into really concise sections, but the engagement and the results we got were quite poor, considering what they would produce in at school. I will put the slides that we used in the pack for everyone to have a look at. And I am tempted to try it with year 7 now we're later on in lockdown, to see if it was just the fact that it was the first project they used. But I was so excited about what they were going to compose, and it was really a case of sitting on the keyboard for quite a lot of the sounds and results we got back. So the final thing Judith asked us to reflect on is some of the things that have worked, what I'd do differently, and how this might impact in my classroom when we eventually get back. I talked about the fact that we're keen to keep the listening, performing and composing going, and actually the composing part of it has worked best for our students out of those 3 elements. I think out of the tasks we've done, and maybe why the year 8 task didn't work so well, is I need to be less prescriptive about the musical features that they use, and perhaps focus more on a brief or the context of the composition in lockdown. And maybe that's where I framed the year 8 task slightly wrong. It was very much focused on the rubrics of composing rather than a brief and capturing their imagination. What have I learned? Well, my audio and video skills are developing daily. So certainly I would be adding different things to the slides at this stage. And I think we're at the point now where I'm actually going to ask for some feedback from the children, because lots of them are discovering apps and different ways of working, and it might be that they've got something to share. When we're back in the classroom, they either work on the iMacs or the instruments. And I think when we get back, I'd like to be more flexible with that as a sign of lockdown and how that would work. And finally, it's mainly the boys that have been doing the extra work and been sending things that haven't been work that have been set, but Miss, I've had a go at making this beat, or Miss, can you listen to my music? And I think one of the things I'd like to do as lockdown continues is maybe encourage some of our female students and maybe tap into kind of the songwriting side of things, because I think a lot of our students do songwrite, but they're not perhaps sharing or feeling comfortable. So that's where I'd like to develop kind of the independent and extra learning they're doing at the moment. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. That's really, really interesting. Thank you. I know that people will have things to say and comments to make, but I think I'd like to move straight on to the next person, who is Nick. I'm aware of the time. So let's, without any further ado, introduce Nick. Here he is, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Nick.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to get my screen share on the go. Hopefully everyone can see that. Thumb up would be good, somebody. Can we see that? Anybody? Good, thank you, Judith. Right, lovely. So I want to talk you through our journey, really, I suppose. I'm Nick Hughes. I'm the Head of Performing Arts Faculty at Robert Smythe Academy, which is part of the Tudor Grange Academies Trust group. We're 11 to 19 academy. We're in kind of rural South Leicestershire. To give you a context, we've got 10% PP students. It's a very white school. So obviously some of the things that work with my students might not work in an inner city school, for example. So when lockdown first happened, I'm just going to get rid of this thing on the side of my screen so I can see what I've got here. When lockdown first happened, similar to what Sarah said, we got the curriculum and basically chucked it in the bin. It wouldn't function. I instructed most of our staff to almost ignore teaching new material, much similar to what Sarah said. And we were just going to do building on what they'd already learned, etc., etc. I do have a colleague who's also the head of music, believe it or not. I'm music technology specialist, so I teach music technology and music as well. So our head of music kind of took charge and said, right, let's go with this for the first week. The first week we did actually do the Learning Music Ableton task with Year 7 and Year 8, and they really enjoyed it. I am going to be focusing on Key Stage 3, actually. I forgot to say that. Purely because most of the composing that I've been working with has been the Key Stage 3 students. So, but the problem was, the reason why we threw it in the bin, because the students couldn't access the instrumental resources that we had, the keyboards, the equipment, the ukuleles. They couldn't access the practice rooms for group composing. They couldn't access our computers and software, which we would use for composing. And the other thing they couldn't access was each other, really, which was, obviously we do a lot of group composing at Key Stage 3. Students can do individual composing if they wish, but normally it's just group composing. So this is what we tried after we did the Learning Music with Ableton task, and that was just a quick, oh goodness, what are we going to do? Let's just set them that's Key Stage 3 sorted for the first week, because we were worrying about Year 10, Year 11 at the time as well, and 12 and 13, until obviously Year 11 and 13 were knocked on the head. So first of all, we were setting, composing task-wise, we set something on Share My Homework, and it was just text. So we were just setting them written words, we were sending them a message, they were seeing it as text. And this is the first thing we set them. They could pick one of 3 options. First option was music technology. They could use an online DAW called Foundation, which operates, I think, just in Chrome. And they were just going to write a piece of music on it. There was more information in the Show My Homework document for them. It wasn't just that one sentence. There was a link to, there's some online tutorials, you need to register. Second option was your voice. So write a song on a topic of your choice. Again, there's a bit from the blurb. Consider what lyrics you will write in the order they will appear in the song. The third one was your instrument. For those of them who had instrumental lessons, they could obviously compose a piece in any style they wanted on their instrument. Now, I personally didn't get much back. I teach two classes in Year 7 out of 6, and I teach 1 Year 8 class out of 5. And I didn't get a fat lot back. So we kind of reconvened, and we had to really focus on what the problems were with that. So the problems with the music technology task, I didn't get any submissions at all. All I got was complaints. And then my colleague Lucy, she was finding that only really the higher ability students could access it without a teacher being present with them. So some students only had phones and they couldn't access this. Again, we didn't find this out until you're in lockdown. And you find out that, oh, I can't access that, so I'm only using my phone, or there's 4 kids in the house and there's 1 laptop to share, for example. So that was a big problem. In fact, I even had a parent email me saying he couldn't even work out how to register and work Foundation. So that was a problem. Voice, again, only singers who had access to a keyboard, guitar took part. However, on the flip side of that, going back to what Sarah said, I had 2 or 3 singers, female students, who probably would never have shown me their songs ever, submitted some really, really nice pieces. And the other one was the instrument. And really, it's only those who had instrumental lessons really took part in this. And that's similar to having a maths student who can only access tasks because they have private tuition outside of school once a week. It's the same kind of comparison. So the problem was the gap between the lower ability students and the higher ability students, and that's generally through their overall ability, but also as well through their musical ability. That gap just got wider and wider and wider. It was going to happen anyway. We all know that. We've all read the bits and bobs about that, but it was very stark when we got that work back. So we kind of took stock and thought, right, let's go back to basics. So we wanted something that everybody can access and get involved with. Now, we've never used body percussion as part of our Key Stage 3 curriculum. Other schools in our trust do it in Year 7. In fact, it's the first thing they do, I believe, in one of the schools. And we thought, let's just make sure everyone can access something. Everybody can do something. So we gave them videos. We obviously set the task on Show My Homework, but we gave them a video. We didn't make it. The first one, in fact, I think it's this guy here. It was the Beat Goes On guy here. He was on CBeebies. So that's kind of where we're aiming. He's from a CBeebies show here. So we sent them a link to a YouTube tutorial. It was like 1.5 minutes long, which is the guy here from Beat Goes On, and we asked them to practice it. And then there was a second link to another YouTube tutorial by somebody else called Groove Today, and we asked them to practice that one. And then we asked them to combine the two together, get someone in the house, you know, teach it to them, get them to practice it, playing in time. Again, this is just retrieval. This is performance, really. And then obviously the extension task was to sing and rap over that, or get somebody else to play an instrument or instruments over the top from the household. I believe my colleague had almost a whole family band playing over body percussion, which was interesting. And the following week, the task was to create their own beats for 2 people and layer them. I only got videos back, annoyingly, but then the only one I did get back that was just audio was from this first task. So if I just quickly play this. Okay, so that's kind of the idea. I would love to play you one lad's video that he did talking to the camera. It was very inspired. But it was interesting to note, actually, that although I'd asked him to compose when he did create this, he'd actually found another YouTube video and used another example from another YouTube video that was quite high up in the rankings for body percussion. But that's okay. But that's hopefully what some people would class as composing anyway. Right, the multimedia breakthrough. Meanwhile, Key Stage 4 and 5, mainly Key Stage 5, we were doing a lot of videoing work. So we were doing a lot of recording the screen, using visualizers. My colleague who teaches the set works analysis for A-level, she'd have a visualizer out or a phone out and record herself analyzing, notating out on the score. Year 12 students loved that. They were, you know, emailing it back, sending her work, etc., etc. I was recording a lot of music tech. I was just lessons. I was doing direct instruction. And I had basically a piece of paper down with Sharpies, and I was basically teaching like a whiteboard, and then showing them things in Cubase as well. And we use Microsoft Streams. Again, we're a Microsoft school, so we were using Stream to share that with them, and that helped them enormously. Year 12 have been hugely enthusiastic about the way we've been doing that. But then we were thinking, well, how are we going to build that into the Key Stage 3 learning? Because the musical gap is so wide when they're at home, when we're not there to support them. You know, the low ability almost would just drop off. So while we were being happy and thinking how great we're doing Key Stage 4 and 5, well, how we're doing Key Stage 5 mainly, Key Stage 3, we were setting this. Now, again, this isn't composing, but it kind of leads into how we were working. We were using Chrome Songmaker. We were asking students to recreate famous melodies orally. So it was around May the 4th. I think there's a lady in Australia, I can't remember her name now, and she made this quick resource about, it's May the 4th, get them to recreate the Star Wars theme. Brilliant. Okay. So we tweaked that a bit and did our own version of it. The good thing about the Songmaker was it was open access and on all devices. So even if they were just on their phones, they can do it on their phones. They can share the work straight away with us. They just copy the link and send it straight to us, email or on Show My Homework. We then offered them feedback via email and Show My Homework, a quick little note about what was maybe wrong, try the end bit, keep counting, think about where the grids are on the beat, the pulse. And then at the end of that, we were then doing a screen share and video of showing them how to do it properly, and good practice from other students. And it was great having me being able to narrate over the top and move the mouse around, the picture, etc., etc. So here's an example of one student. That's what it looks like. You've got the rhythm down the bottom here. It's in 3. I think this is Pirates of the Caribbean, or it's supposed to be. You can change the scale and it just goes up in pitch. And obviously, you've got the beat there for the crotchet beats there, so on and so forth. But then other people could take it even further. So some students just went to town on it, put harmony on it, changed the rhythm later on, etc., etc. I'm not going to play that because I'm conscious of time. Now, building on that, and that was a huge success, by the way. They all really liked it. They could all access it. They all sending work in. And even when I'd sent in fact, I've just had 2 more in my inbox today. I mean, this was a task that was done a week ago. I think it was before half term, and I put up a video with a model answer on. Some people are sending me, okay, how about this one? I've seen the video. Can you just listen to this one for me now? They've really engaged with it. So that kind of, in terms of supporting students, that's worked really well, because we are having dialogue with them and it's working. So
Nick,
coming next week.
Sorry
Yes.
to interrupt, Nick, but
Have I gone on?
you've had 10 minutes, so...
can I wrap up quick?
Yeah.
Cool, thanks, mate. So we're doing Band Lab, similar sound foundation, but you've got classrooms. But the main thing that we're going to be looking at is we're going to be doing this video process. So I've videoed how to use it. I've done a video how to register. I've done another video of how to get started. And then I'm working around the note C. So they all know where C is. And this was inspired by my 6-year-old son, who was on Songmaker, and he just kept repeating a C. And he was there for 45 minutes, silent. But I was watching him do it. And he just had a C drone across the front. So we're going to be doing that because they can all find out where C is. You can find C on a QWERTY keyboard if you look down here. If you just press the comma, there's the C. The Z is also the C, etc., etc. Higher ability students can explore it creatively, and lower abilities can also create something, also allowing other parts, which can also just be the note C, but on a rhythm. It works with their prior learning in the curriculum. In other words, we're going to look at drum beat notation. They can add drum beats in, bass lines, etc. And there are pre-existing tutorials. They don't have to rely on just mine. I'm giving them links to other people explaining the same thing, which I think is absolutely vital in the absence of formative questioning, really, that you get in a classroom. So they can save it with send it to me in the classroom. I can comment on the work, give them personalized feedback. I then do a video sharing common misconceptions they have. Sort of video-based stuff and having this dialogue, and that's how they feel supported. That's what we found out. Oh, the other thing is there's no summative assessment, which I think has been an absolute dream for us. So things that come to pass, these are what I'm going to take from it, or see what I'm interested in seeing. Students are without the pressures, time constraints, or anxieties of the classroom to create. What will happen? This is very much what Sarah was saying about, talking about them not having that anxiety, the teacher over them, peers next to them, etc. Is this situation more akin to composing in the real world, where they can dip in and out at various times of the day? They're not just constrained. You will compose in this 1 hour of the day on a Monday. Then does the alleviation of summative assessment create more freedom? And does the lack of group composing widen the gap further, or does the lack of social comparison to peers not impact as much on individual composing? Which again was similar to what Sarah was saying. I have finished. Thank you. I'm going to stop my share now.
Thank you, Nick. That's really interesting. Nice to see the synchronization between you and Sarah on the things that you're finding out. Okay, quick fire time. Time to move on to Annie, who's our third teacher of the afternoon. Hi, Annie.
Hi everybody, I'm Annie, and I'm the subject lead for music at the University of Birmingham School. We are mixed gender, very diverse school in Selly Oak in Birmingham. So I guess we are kind of maybe a bit more inner city than Nick's school that he was talking about, maybe a bit more similar to Sarah's. And we teach children from year 7 all the way through to year 13. So I thought I'd start by talking to you about year 12 composition, because this is something that we actually had the chance to start with David and BCMG just before the lockdown, and also because it's not something that's been talked about by Sarah or Nick so far. So something that has worked really well for us during lockdown is being able to work with our year 12s on a kind of very individual, albeit distant basis on their composition. So just before lockdown, they started working with David and Naomi, who's a saxophonist with BCMG, and they'd started exploring, they did 2 sessions with them, starting thinking about what the saxophone can do, and David was really kind of pushing them to think about sound and what the saxophone can do and the sounds that it can make, which was an amazing privilege to kind of for them to be able to engage with a musician like that and kind of think in those ways. And then lockdown arrived. So actually inspired by an idea I heard from Sarah at last year's Listen, Imagine, Compose, we decided to ask the students to have a go at writing a nocturne. And so we asked them to try and think about writing a nocturne for saxophone and maybe piano. And so lockdown came, we got them access to Noteflight and kind of sent them away to have a go. And each week they've been doing something and sending it to us. I have a really small year 12 class this year, so there's only 3 students. So this is perhaps a luxury that wouldn't work in other situations, but I've been able to then open their work from my end, and I've initially I was kind of writing a response on things that I liked, or questions for them to think about, or bits that I wasn't sure quite worked. Could they try this, that and the other? Maybe kind of making an example of so for example, Callum had done some chordal accompaniment but really low for all of it, and it was kind of very like growly, very kind of taking over. So I kind of had rearranged the chord with a higher voicing and sent that back to him. Latterly, I've been doing videos with me sharing my screen through an awesome program called Loom, which I'd really recommend if people are starting to do videos, something one of our SLT sent around to us, and it kind of captures your screen really well. And that seems to have been working really, really well, actually. And the thing that I think I've really found through the process of working with them is, firstly, I don't think I give them enough time to actually come up with stuff. I think we'll maybe do an hour in the classroom and then I'll send them home and say, I'll do some more. But they're used to doing it in the classroom on Sibelius. So I'm not really setting them up to carry on at home and then come back having done more. And as a result, they generally haven't done anything and they haven't spent that much time on it. And it takes us a long time to get anywhere, and they kind of don't really get into a flow. And it can be a bit more tricky for perhaps students who feel they're more performers than composers, you know. And actually being able to have that time and let them kind of work at their own pace. So one week, Ayana did loads and came up with an amazing A section, and then a contrasting B section, which was just like felt really that she spent hours on it. It felt really kind of complete, quite polished, quite really well done. And she'd obviously spent a lot of time investing in that week. And I think perhaps I don't think about giving them the space to achieve in composition. So that was one thing that I kind of really thought about from this experience. And the other thing I thought was, on the similar lines, so much of what I have always done with composition tends to be very based in the classroom. And although we'll often say to them, carry this work on at home, they don't have the same access to Logic or Sibelius. And those tend to be the things that, although we always say to them, you know, sit at an instrument, imagine it in your mind. And David did lots of work with them around that when we got to work with him. I think they still then sit down at the computer and start composing, and then they leave the classroom and leave it behind. And so I think it's been really interesting to challenge me to think about how I can help them see themselves as composing and composers in a more kind of portable outside of that seat in front of the computer or in the classroom with us sense. And that I think has been really surprising to me. And then the other thing I think I've found, and if I've got time, I'll talk to you guys about something we've done with Year 8, which is quite different. But I think I found that and not a surprise, and similar to I think what Sarah and Nick was saying, is it's reminded me that so much of what we can really do meaningfully is about the feedback that we give. And actually you need the students to go away and do stuff so that you can then listen to it and try and move them forwards and ask questions and get them to think and get them to try other things. And I think often the way that I've been working with students with composition means that we don't get to the point where it's more coming from them and then me giving ideas back for them to try and develop. And I think that's going to be really important moving forwards, to try and continue it in that way where it's more about me responding to what they're doing rather than them going away and trying to respond to what I've said or they think that I want, which I think touches on what Sarah was mentioning in the first talk. With Year 8, one thing I always think when I'm talking to kind of all of you amazing music teachers and composers about composition is that I find myself really reflecting that I think I have a weakness in my curriculum design, that composing in Key Stage 3 is much more about teaching them technical skill, teaching them, for example, with Year 8, we have a big focus on trying to get them to understand kind of functional harmony, that you have a chord and this is how a chord works and this is the root of the chord that you play in the bass, and then how kind of getting them to try and improvise with scales that will fit on top of those chords. But it's not really, you know, I was really enjoying listening to Sarah talking about getting the children to really play with sound, because that's not so much of how I've designed our curriculum. So the year 8 task was using BandLab, which Nick mentioned, and I think it's worked really, really well. For us, across all subjects, only about 30% of children are engaging with tasks that are being set regularly. So we have a big issue for lots of reasons with engagement in distance learning, but we are getting about the same numbers engaging with us with this year 8 task using BandLab. And so I think it doesn't seem like BandLab is and these composition tasks are posing any additional issues for students in terms of being able to complete work. And kind of in line with the way that our Key Stage 3 curriculum is based, we wanted to get them to do some composition. Our school are quite firm on not wanting to get them, lots of our children and families share a computer, so it needs to be stuff they can do anytime, so we can't do live lessons. And they're also been very keen for us to do videoed things, because a lot of the early feedback was that the students were struggling to read the information that was coming out. So I organised it where each week I would set them a little bit of a composition task to do in a kind of guided manner, where I'd do a video of me doing what I'd like them to try on BandLab, and then they'd kind of do it along with the video themselves. So week 1 I got them to write to pick 2 chords and record them in on the offbeat. So we tried to do something inspired by reggae, because they'd just been doing a reggae band performance unit before we broke for lockdown. And then so I did a little video of me making a song and using 2 different chords on beats 2 and 4, and then we did a bass line that was based off of the root note, and then we did a melodic riff that was getting them to come up with something using the notes from the chord, and then getting them to write a drum beat with a little kind of stylistic drum little pickup intro, and then the most exciting bit, which was trying to get them to write a melody over the top. And this was the bit that was really cool, because in school they will not sing, they will not want to compose their own using their voice, they hate it, they feel really self-conscious as a general rule, and they got really into this. Generally I had a few who said, can I do it on piano instead, or can I, if they played instruments, they said, oh, can I play it on an instrument, or that kind of thing. But loads of them did it, and loads of them even added in like vocal harmonies and little kind of backing vocals. And I think the fact that they got to do it in their own time at home without kind of having to be in front of their peers really helped them. And again, BandLab's awesome for feedback, because I was able, once they join your class and start the assignment, you can see their work as they're going, and you can click, view it, you can write comments for them. So it was a really good forum for me to really try and flip it a bit, so that I'm moving their learning on because of my feedback, rather than setting them a task for them to try and then not having the same, being able to have the same impact with feedback, which I do find is an issue in the classroom, because there's so many to get around and all that kind of thing. So that was really cool, and I think moving forwards it's also worked really well. We do a lot of composition like that using Logic in our classroom, and they have to work in pairs, which is great in loads of ways, but it was really nice to see some of the students who actually normally kind of sit back and let the partner do it, doing some really great things and really making progress, which was really cool. So I think, and maybe trying to think of some way to get them to be able to do stuff like that from home, or be able to work perhaps even more individually doing composition. And yes, Monica, you can access their work the whole way through before they submit it, and you can even edit it if it will let you save. Sometimes the website crashes a bit, and you can comment on it. As long as you set it as an assignment, they can then you can then see it all the way through. They can also work on private projects that you can't see, and so we're setting a college. We have colleges where we've just said you can do anything. You can use loops in BandLab, you can do whatever you want, and so we're hoping that lots of them will do that we won't see until they send it in to us. I think I was going to say one more thing and I can't remember what it was, but yeah, so that's kind of what we've been doing, and yeah, how it's been working.
Fantastic. Thank you, Annie. That was great. So again, lots to discuss and think about there. Lots of similarities and lots of different approaches too. And it's great. I didn't know you were going to talk about a BCMG project with David. So that's really happy coincidence that David's the composer who's with us today. And we'll be able to build on that later. So I'm going to hand over to Martin, who's going to put some sort of theoretical context on that. So he's going to talk for 5 minutes, and then we will go into breakout groups so that we can discuss some of these ideas and obviously your own experiences as well, and draw together our sort of top tips. But over to Martin next.
So I just want to talk about just a couple of theoretical issues. I don't have data on this immediately, but last time we looked, which was a few years ago, group composing was often the normal modality of how it worked at Key Stage 3. If it isn't the case in your school, that's fine, but nationally, that's what we found. And one of the things I just want to mention is the idea, instead of thinking about composing, to think about thinking. And what group composing does is it distributes the cognitive processes between members of a group. And that's quite important in thinking about thinking. This is a really rough diagram I drew many years ago. But if you think the idea of composing being shared between people, then the 5 individuals are sharing the thinking between them. And that's quite an important point. And that's one of the things I really want to pick up, just as a problem and an issue, is to think about the ways in which we do that. Now, in many schools, I've seen people have posters and things about the idea of Vygotsky's notion of the zone of proximal development. If you know what it is, that's fine. If you don't, I won't have time to tell you now. But if you know about the zone of proximal development, you'll know that one of the things it says is that pupils are able to work conjointly at a higher level than would be possible if they were working alone. And the bit that I just talked about was the idea of cognitive aspects of composing being shared amongst members of the group. And we have a sort of everyday phrase in English, which is many hands make light work. And I wonder if you could change that to be many brains make light work. So when you're sharing composing, it's distributed. But the important thing is that this is always theorized as a stage in the development of autonomous skills. So in other words, we share it first, and then we can do it by ourselves later. And I think that's really interesting. Now, lots of people have worked on the group composing process, me included, and modeled it in terms of the ways in which people work when they are working in a group. But one of the things I think is really interesting is that in the current lockdown situation, although we've heard counterexamples this afternoon from the teachers, in many ways what we've done is we've been forced to move to individual composing. I've always had a little bit of a bee in my bonnet about how we transition from group composing at Key Stage 3 to solo composing at Key Stage 4. And sometimes I get the feeling this is like happens really rapidly, and there isn't really a transition. But I think it's interesting to be thinking about what are the transitions and what are the implications for how we're working at the moment. And so the things that I think are important, mentally now, all the cognitive processes are now contained with the individual. But I'm just going to have a little moment of thinking about what that means, because what they are composing with or on can be significant here. And there's a thing called affordances. Again, if you don't know about affordances, this is a nice little thing to look up. And the person who's written about it a lot is somebody called Gibson, who has nothing to do with electric guitars. But the idea of affordances is what can an instrument do that you then take advantage of. So here, for example, are 4 instruments. And you can think of what are the affordances. What does each instrument enable, facilitate, allow, or to use the word that is on the screen, afford the person playing it to be able to do. So, and then if we think about the affordances of those instruments, and then we think about what are the affordances of technology, because again, we've heard from our teachers about people composing with technology. What does composing afford the individual that may be acoustic, let's call, although I know the electronic keyboard isn't an acoustic instrument, what do those instruments have which is different from these? And maybe this is something that we need to be thinking about, particularly in lockdown. So I've got a series of questions that I just want us to be thinking about this afternoon. So I've talked about the with and without tech, and I think as music educators we do need to think about this. Then there's the idea of what differences does solo composing versus group composing make to individual children. And then another thing, I've been thinking about this a lot recently. By recently, I probably mean the duration of Listen, Imagine, Compose, which I'm shocked to hear is now 10 years, which is scary. But one of the questions we've thought about in the past is how little, not how much, how little do children and young people need to know or be able to do to be able to undertake a solo composing task. So what's the minimum that they need to know or be able to do? Not what do they need to be able to do, not what's the maximum. This has come about because I see a lot on Twitter about everybody needs to know everything about music before they can even begin to composing, to begin to be composing. And I've wondered about how little. And then what can be done to help those kids that we have, the children and young people who have little or no experience of composing. And I understand that that varies hugely, but what can we as music educators do to help those people? And then finally, what help do music teachers want and need? And this is a nice philosophical description. What's the difference between a want and a need? In order to be able to do something about this. And so hopefully this Listen, Imagine, Compose CPD is addressing both wants and needs. And so those are things that I want us to be thinking about. When you get the PowerPoint, you'll get the references and all the other bits and pieces as well.
Thank you, Martin. Wow, there's lots to think about there. Okay, I think it's time to break into groups. So we have randomly divided the company in this Zoom gathering into, I've forgotten, 6 or 7 groups. So that hopefully there's a small enough number of you in each room to sort of be able to talk to each other. The task, you're going to have 15 minutes, and the task is, in that 15 minutes, to appoint a spokesperson, because we're going to ask you to report back, and to discuss either the ideas presented today or some of the methods and tactics that you've been using yourselves at school, and to boil it down to 3 top tips that you can then share back to the room. So in a way, if you've got things that are different or building on things that you've heard already, that would be even better. And the aim is we'll collate all of that afterwards and share it. So if you can make sure there's one person in the room who's kind of keeping a note and reporting back, if you want to also put it into the group chat, or you could put it into an email and send it to me, that would also be great. So without any further ado, I'm kind of looking at my colleague Lau, who's going to press go. So I'm going to go group by group and ask some spokespeople to report back the 3 top tips. So I'd like this to go quite quickly, really 30 seconds per spokesperson, 30 seconds to a minute. And if you have made notes that you could share with us, so if there's something more extensive, that would be great. So I'm going to go straight to, hopefully you've all remembered which group you're in, but I'm going to go straight to group 1 and ask that spokesperson to share with us their 3 top tips.
Oh, hello, it's Ewan from group 1. Our 3 top tips are, number 1, give them some choice. So that they can, number 2, so that you actually get a bit more intake. Number 2 is be wary of technology, because Tom was saying that things like BandLab, if they're doing stuff on their phones, it works very differently than if they're doing stuff on the laptops, and you can do that. And number 3, which is my top tip, if you've got year 9 and they're doing options and they've not picked music, try and get rid of them, so you've got less marking and less assessment to do as you're going through.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Who was in group 2? Just take, if you were the spokesperson for group 2, just take yourself off mute and speak up.
I can't actually remember which group we were. Are we 2? Great. Okay, so group 2. Most people are using online and digital platforms. Secondly, just be wary of the kind of overload of feedback and marking and having to respond to everybody, and maybe thinking more about responding back to the class and giving feedback to the class rather than to individuals. And then Simon has been using OneDrive as a really useful way of giving almost live feedback to young people, and they get a transcript and they can go back to it. And so maybe he might share a little bit more about how he's doing that within the chat, or some other points. It sounded really useful.
Thank you, Nancy. Over to group 3.
I think we were group 3, pretty sure. I've got lots of notes, but generally it seems to be that, simplifying stuff, particularly at this stage, because we're still in the early stages, if you like, of this new, approach. Simple things do seem to be the best way. Perhaps focusing more on sound, like people have mentioned, rather than composition, because it can perhaps cause sort of barriers or a bit of anxiety. And also the other thing that might cause barriers is access to music tech. Again, this has been said. And not having the right devices. So as teachers, etc., we need to be aware of that. And the video, giving people instruction via video and leading by example as well as written work is good. As someone that works with inclusion, that's obviously good for things like special needs and dyslexia, etc. I'm a kinesthetic learner anyway, so I'd prefer that. And an area of sort of worry perhaps is being able to give people feedback, because if you've got 300 kids emailing you with things, obviously you need to be able to provide feedback that is meaningful whilst not stressing yourself out completely. There's many positive things, but one of them I've picked up here is, it's been mentioned before, the freedom from sort of peer pressure, and people are flourishing who may not have flourished before. So if I personally was going to sum that all up, I think it's really just diversifying and expanding curriculums and looking for simple ways to include everybody now that we can see more people are being included. I've had feedback from students who are like flourishing at home because they haven't got these pressures. So I think I think that's it.
Fantastic, thank you. Over to group 4.
I think that's us, group 4. We've got 3 main talking points, not really top tips. Number 1, how important is it that our relationships with our students are really kind of highlighted in this? The amount of engagement we're getting is basically based on the amount of the good relationships we're having with our students. Number 2, there was a great idea about maybe sending out a survey or something about how we're going to gather information about the type of kit that people have got at home, how many laptops, how many phones, what you're going to be doing on it. Maybe that can kind of inform the planning. And number 3, trying to set very, very accessible and basic generic tasks with generic equipment that are accessible to all, no matter what phone, if you're Apple or Android or whatever. So try and make those tasks very big so that everyone can have a go. There are kind of 3 talking points.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, over to group 5. I know that was Morris who's going to be spokesperson.
Yeah, hello, can you hear?
Yep.
Okay, lots of things and some really interesting things from everybody actually. But one idea that came up was because of all the work that's coming in from the children individually, we're suddenly finding ourselves with loads of stuff to mark, and I think it was Simon suggested a grid. He's made a grid to keep track of work coming in. So that's one idea. Another idea, I mean, again, it's talking about things. It's making videos for the students and modelling what we want them to do, so they can see what's happening on screen, and as I suppose we would in a lesson, really, we'd model things. Working off tech was another one that. Particularly good instrumentalists sometimes are put off by tech, and even if they like it, they feel more creative when their fingers are feeling the instrument, so playing the piano instead of playing a QWERTY keyboard. Because quite a lot of people don't have keyboards connected to their computers. And the idea that lockdown ought to give them more freedom to work how they want. Rather than how we want them to work in the confines of a particular classroom setup. There's lots of other stuff as well, but I suppose I could type that in. Send it in.
Thank you. Great. Group 6. Was there a group 6? Oh, it's
yes, there
hello.
was. It's me again, so I'm going to try and keep this brief. I spoke too much earlier. We were talking about, again, different cloud-based things. Beatbox was one that was raised as a really good browser-based pattern sequencer, which was a lot of fun. It can either be really simple or really, really advanced. Flora was saying that They'd done a lot of minimalism-based things with it, with a lot of rhythmic displacement. Cross-curricular composition tasks was a really interesting one from someone on their PGCE, and they were saying how a cross-curricular composition task between a dance department and a music department that helped create a context for the composition, because that was off the back of me talking about Grayson Perry talking on his show about how in art they'd think about, you know, holistic things and composing for those rather than, you know, musical data and musical theory. And then another website was something called Incredibox, which someone in our group said was great for their year 7s. They've got little characters in them. It looks mental. I've just looked at it. And also as well, it's good for building up layers of sound, because you can introduce ideas of silence, which in my book is always great. And I will stop.
Thank you, Nick. I mean, I don't mean thank you for stopping. I mean, thank you for your feedback. Was there a group 7? No, it appears not. Okay, fantastic. In which case, we will collate all of that, and I'm going to turn it into some kind of little blog, I think, and put it on the Listen Imagine Compose website. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to David Horn, who is a composer and educator. I'm going to allow David to introduce himself and introduce what we're going to be doing for the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Judith. It's nice to see everyone here. It was great to see some of you that I saw before the lockdown. Annie, of course, we were in your school on the 12th. Joe, we were in your school on the 10th of March. And then at the RCM, we closed down on the 16th. And were immediately told off by the Office for Students for doing that, because we hadn't been given permission. And they backtracked on that, so it's all about rewriting history now. It's interesting, a lot of the challenges that you've all been talking about are not dissimilar to HE, and certainly in the music conservatoire environment. So moving towards teaching practical lessons online has been a really big challenge. I mean, we have a lot of tutors who have a hard enough time dealing with email, and never mind this whole new environment. And what the breakout room I was in raised, and some of you have raised as well, is the whole problem of student access. And that is so varied, and we cannot assume that, you know, anyone is going to have access to some of the equipment that, you know, you might be using in the classroom. What I do a lot when I go into schools is to really enthuse students, and also teachers actually, about the amazing sounds that live musicians, live performers make. So I'll kind of very quickly just take you through, let's see, there we go. So obviously Listen, Imagine, Compose you'll be aware of. I've not got many slides, don't worry, I'll go through them very quickly. But I want to talk today about how we compose for performers in a virtual environment. So in Annie's school, this is all anonymized. So I did, everyone might want to turn off their microphones, by the way. I can hear some extra noises, so just make sure you're muted. I will often be working with composers in a high school environment and how they can quickly create compositions. So for example, in Annie's school, this was created in about 15 minutes. Now, back to Martin's point earlier on about group composition, you can probably tell from the handwriting, it's not consistent, because essentially I play a game of musical consequences, where one of the students will write one bar of a piece and then they hand it around. And so it's very much a collective effort, but it really teaches a lot. Here we have a year 12 example, a little bit similar, but that's a kind of side issue. The most important thing is that we're always working with a live performer. In this case, it was saxophone, working with Naomi in that particular school. We spent a bit of time kind of really exploring the instrument, how it sounds. And I always am interested in getting the students themselves to be asking questions. So rather than me doing a presentation for half an hour on what the saxophone is, or for that matter, the performer doing a presentation, we like to kind of coax out questions. What are they interested in? So how can we work effectively with live performers in a lockdown environment? Using video, audio, how to experience the instrument, And a term that we're using a lot at the moment in conservatoire, certainly, but this notion of asynchronous learning, that not everything needs to happen on the spot, live. So I'm currently working with a lot of performers based all over the UK and even further afield, where I've been working on some composition projects, and everyone has different equipment. No one was prepared for the lockdown. So I'm working with people who may not have very professional microphones, they may not have the best quality kind of video cameras, and it's really looking at how we work within that kind of environment. You're shortly going to do your own really, really short tasks, and then we'll go through as many of them as we have time for. But you're going to send them to this email address, lic@myname.co.uk. That's just so that when I open my emails, I know exactly where that's going to be. And it's going to be just 2 very short ideas that I want you to think about, using any combination of notation, graphic score, instructions. And the only requirement that you only send me an image. It could include a PDF, but please don't send something like a Sibelius file or something like that. Okay, I will come out of that and back into the real world and see all of you again. And I want to introduce Kyle. Now, depending on how you've set up your Zoom, you want to make sure you're on speaker view, so that way when Kyle plays, you'll see him, and then we'll go back and forward. So, one of the advantages of using Zoom, which is why we're using it today, is because the sound quality can be very good. Now, obviously, in the high school environment, it's not being used. I've heard some of the platforms you're using. I know that Teams is used a lot. It does allow us, at least in this workshop situation, however, to get close to the sound. So Kyle is using something called Original Sound. I also later will be playing his sounds through my computer directly. So it's a much kind of higher quality experience. So let's imagine now that we had 2 hours, and of course we don't. And so you're now introducing Kyle to your class, you're introducing the saxophone to the class. So what can it do? How does it sound? So Kyle, play your lowest note, please. Okay, now play your lowest note as quietly as you can play it.
I don't know, could you hear that, actually?
Yes, yes. In fact, over, I mean, that was actually pretty good quality. And not only could we hear, obviously, I'm sure there's some sax players among you, playing the lowest note very soft is about the cruelest thing you could ask any performer to do. And we heard the tension in it. You heard that it was very soft, but you also heard all that air. And that was absolutely great. Now, we don't have time to explore, you know, even the beginning of what an instrument like the saxophone can actually do. But if all of you can be thinking now of questions that your students might have, and if you can think of one, I'll open the chat box. Just put a quick question in the chat, something you want to hear from Kyle, something to do with the instrument, a particular sound, something to do with the range. Vibrato, fantastic. So Kyle, let's start a note, and then after a couple of seconds, play it with no vibrato first, then add vibrato. Again, really, really nicely demonstrated, really, really clear. And we've got Altissimo G. Go even higher. There you go. I think that's the one that they were meaning. And growl, let's have a growl. And just key clicks, no air. Notice how in this environment you even hear all the different pitches. Now, when I was talking about asynchronous learning, why that could be useful is it might be that you're having to do this over an environment where the sound is not going to be so good. So what you can do is also record it. So Kyle could be recording it, and that could be sent. In other words, you're able to make this contact. The students will remember, they've heard it, they've seen it, but then when they actually hear it in better quality, that can make a really big difference. Let's go through lots of fantastic questions here. Could we have just a dark multiphonic, please?
Or there are sweeter ones.
And I like there's a question here about the longest note. Now the thing is, the longest note in a wind instrument depends which note it is. So let me just pick one. The written A above middle C. Play that, take as much breath as you want, and play it as long as you can, and I'll time it. A safe 25 seconds, well done. Okay, great. I've got lots of other great questions as well, but I'll tell you what, in the short 2 ideas that you're going to write, put some of those in. Now remember, you've got a lot of scope here, and I'm aiming this very much thinking about the classroom environment where maybe some students are using notation, maybe they're using Sibelius or Cubase, maybe that's how they're going to create it. Maybe some are going to use graphic scores, or maybe some are actually going to use the actual technical terms that you're used to there. So for example, Kyle, play a very fast C major scale going up 2 octaves. Play a very fast chromatic scale coming down. Play a C major arpeggio going up and down quickly. So you see, even just actually giving words, play a B flat and an A, then a C sharp. Yeah. So you can use any way you want of getting some ideas. Just something to get you thinking about, and I am unfortunately going to go into something which is technological, but I'm going to use a piece of software which is free. So providing your student has at least some access to computer, it should be fairly easy to get. So I'm going to share screen again. I'm also going to share my computer's sound. And I'll just go to Audacity. So you can see this here. I recorded Kyle yesterday, so I asked him just to play a quick scale, and then we get this. Yeah. Then I also asked him to do the key clicks. You hear how I've put that all together. Let's get that away. And then also just to breathe air without making any sound. So if we do this one. And then put that all together from the top. Sorry. Screen sharing. So the reason I mentioned that, again, is not saying that you must be using Audacity or getting students to use Audacity, but suddenly you see you've got 2 or 3 or 4 Kyles. So what can you do with that? So maybe when you think about these 2 very short contrasting ideas, you can think about how they might be mixed together. So Judith, if you could remind us, please, how much time we're going to have. You're going to have a short break now, then we come back.
Sure. So we're going to give you 10 minutes to jot down some ideas. As David says, use any format to write down your ideas and email them. Perhaps David, you could share your screen again so that we've got that email address on the screen. That's the address. So we're actually going to go offline and go quiet for 10 minutes so that you have time to think about 2 ideas and email them over to that email address so that David and Kyle can actually realise them afterwards and show you some ideas for composing a piece of music. Hope that's okay. We'll see you in 10 minutes. Just to clarify what's happening for the rest of the session, we'll listen to some of the sort of initial ideas, but David is actually going to set a sort of more extended homework task, and next week we will actually sort of realise some of those ideas in the session next week. So even if you haven't got very far this week or felt a bit stuck, then there's another chance to have a bit more time. So let's see some of the ideas that people have submitted already.
Yeah, and also you're going to find out that the task is essentially an extension of this one. So thanks everyone. They're all kind of streaming in now. We will not be able to get to all of them, but I'm going to go through as sequentially as I possibly can. So the first one here is 2 contrasting graphic scores. So Kyle, if I just screen share that, and then if you want to interpret this one. You're muted, Kyle.
Forgive
There
me.
you go. That's it.
Yeah, okay.
Great, thanks very much. By the same composer, I'll bring up the contrasting one. And again, share that. Fantastic, thanks very much. While I come out of that, if Kyle, you want to comment a little bit on the experience, and again, if anyone wants to ask a question, remember you can use the hand up sign in participants, and then perhaps if Judith, if you want to field if we've got questions, but I'm going to keep on showing you more of these. Okay,
Yeah.
next one's coming up. There you go, and that's both of them. There's the first one at the top, second one down here. Right, and notice how even over Zoom, even the kind of air sounds, you still hear the pitches depending on the fingerings. I see my task at the moment simply to get through as much as I possibly can.
No,
Here's the next one.
They've all been nice for me. I mean, I have no idea if what I've played accorded with what each person imagined. And I think if I was with you live, that would be my first question. Did it sound anything like you imagined it would? But yes, okay.
Fabulous. Again, as I say, feel free to comment, Kyle. I'll keep on putting them up because the point is we're also recording this, so it means you can.
That last one had really good contrast, I thought, and you know, some of those things you did on Audacity, you could do really interesting things, I think, with just those 2 fragments. I'm sure.
Absolutely. Let's have a look at this one. Is that big enough, Kyle?
Yeah, no, yeah, that's fine. Okay, I just need to get my head around it here just for a second. Sorry, that was a bit rubbish, but anyway, I tried to be as violent as I could.
I also love how this one actually looks a little bit like a saxophone.
Yes, and a dragon.
Yes. Yeah, the dragon sax. Okay, let me get another one. And we have a full range here. We have some which are based on textual instructions. So this one, it's a little bit grainy, but I think if I read it out, it'll be very possible to see.
Okay.
There you go. So the first one is graphic, and then the second one, start off with growling notes to create a sense of dread. Then after diminuendo, have ascending notes to your highest note possible. Play a few something of these notes, then
I think it's a few stabs.
that's these notes, then slow descending notes with diminuendo to a silence.
Okay. So that's how I interpret the first section. So then the second one.
Fabulous. Because I've got two screens, I can see a lot of you on the other side as well. So it was all the kind of grimaces as it was getting really high. That was absolutely brilliant.
Sorry, everybody, but yeah, that is the highest note possible.
It was great. Again, any comments, please do bring them up.
Well, that one was interesting because it had pictures of something. You know, whenever you have something circular, obviously, you know how music works. It don't really, time only goes in one direction, so a circle doesn't really work in terms of trying to make something linear. But I just thought, okay, it's a sun, it's a moon, so I'll try to do that thing. The first one that we saw had a star shape, which I tried to do the triangle shapes as they kind of look, but I couldn't do the star quite the same way. You know, that's how I kind of, if it's any use to know, that's how I kind of look at those kind of circular motifs, if that is how you draw them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was really useful. Yeah, I've got another one here. Let's see. Now, I apologize because the composer will have sent two, and because all the files are all over the place, we're only going to have a look at one, but it's quite different, so that'll be useful. Okay.
Okay, there's a bit of it because I have a bit of a gallery of people on the left side of my screen, and I think I'm missing some of the music.
Let me do it again.
Maybe if let's see. No.
Is that better?
I wonder if I can move this. Yes.
Or I
can, no, it's okay. I moved the gallery. Yeah, that's great. That's great. That's great.
Yeah. Okay, great.
There's great. That's great. Okay.
Of course, I just demonstrated my excellent analytical skills. That is two different short ideas, so great. Any other comments before I move on? I'm just watching the time a little bit as well.
Well, there's a really good variety there. I mean, I hope that maybe, for your assignment, that everybody can see that I can try to interpret lots of different kinds of music. The dragon one was the one that I felt I was the least good at straight off the bat. But if I had some time to sort of figure out something that would work for that, even it was a really nice looking thing, but it was harder to make something up just off the top of my head.
All right, that's interesting, because I mean, for me, it came off very well in performance. And put your hands up if you agreed. Yeah, it's quite a lot of agreement there.
Self-criticism, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, I'm happy with notation, traditional notation, graphic notation, instructions. I shall try to do my best to realize, what it is that you indicate. And for me, when I've worked with David and other composers in live BCMG projects, that's the first step. You presented with something, I play it, and then the question is, did that sound like anything like you thought it would? And then the compositional refining process can begin from there, really.
I'm just having a look at the chat as well, and also some of the text I got in the emails. No one misunderstood the task. The task is extremely open, and that's the whole point of this. And what I would like you to think about is, I know it sounds a bit artificial, but try and put yourself in your students' shoes. What do you think they'd be interested to do with this? How might they respond? Obviously, many schools are not lucky enough to get someone like Kyle coming in to play through, but Kyle will know this, but whenever, I love going to schools with such amazing performers, and I really work them hard. We spend much of the time really listening to the music, because that will teach everyone far more than the words. I use the words at the beginning, and I'll demonstrate myself on the piano. I try to get things started, but what you notice when you actually hear that sound, that's when I think the inspiration really starts.
Yeah, I agree.
Good. So we shall look. What's the timeline for this, Judith, in terms of?
So the task is to extend. I need you to articulate what the task is, but in terms of the timeline, we want you to go away and do David's task, and to email it, I think, to me, at Sound and Music, and by the end of Tuesday. And then Kyle will sort of take a look at them on Wednesday and record as many as possible and upload them he'll make videos of them, and then in a sort of break in next Thursday's session, we'll have a listen to some of them, and we'll post all of them on the Listen Imagine Combos website. So do you want to just expand on what you want people to do?
It's more a clarification. Already what people have sent, especially the more textual ones, there's a lot that could be done with that, but we don't want them to be too long. So, ideally, I don't think any particular idea should be longer than 30 seconds. What if we had lots and lots of hours? It'd be really interesting to explore some of these and see where something like Audacity could be really effective. It would work for some and not for others, and that would be part of the process. That's something actually I'm going to encourage you to do by yourself. So what you can do in your composition is you can write it either just assuming it's a completely standalone solo saxophone piece, or you could maybe see it as something which is something that you might want to mix in a program like Audacity or Logic.
Great.
Could I ask, just since, if that's the case, is that something you want to demonstrate and work with in the next session, David, or am I supposed to try to do that in a...
I think the idea is you will play through the solo versions, and then really the Audacity manipulation, that's something for each of you to do in your own way.
Okay.
If you want to.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, David and Kyle. That was such fun. And thank you to Nick and Sarah and Annie and Martin for speaking earlier as well. I hope you found it a useful session and that you've enjoyed it.